So it was back in 2001. I was an intern at my home church in Carthage, Missouri. I was working under my youth minister, my very first mentor. His name was Dusty Frizzell. If you've been around here very long, you've heard me talk about Dusty. And whenever I was in high school, I spent a lot of time with Dusty. I mean, I didn't give this guy any choice other to invest in me. It's like, I'm going to show up day after day, and you're going to have to deal with me whether you want to or not. But whenever I became his intern, Dusty literally allowed me to see everything and to be a part of everything. I was invited into spaces that I never should have been invited into. I was able to go to lunches with him. I was able to go on retreats with him and the elders, and I was able to go on different appointments with him. He let me see it all. And one of the things that Dusty did at this point in his ministry was there was a local middle school in our town, and Dusty had been invited, several youth ministers had been invited, but Dusty had been invited to go to this middle school to teach a class, about a week-long class on abstinence. And so I got to go along with Dusty. And whenever we got there, Dusty, he would kick off every class the exact same way. He would invite the kids to share their name and then to share a special fact about themselves. And so the kids would go around and say, my name is fill in the blank and I play this sport. Or my name is fill in the blank and this is my hobby. Or you had those kids who were like, my name is this, and then they'd say something completely off the wall just to basically be like, Dusty, this is the dumbest thing I've ever had to do in my life. I don't want to tell you a special fact about myself. But there was this one kid, and I don't remember his name, but his answer to what was special about him, I will remember it forever, but it's not because of what he said as much as it is because of the awkward response that Dusty had to it. He said, my name is fill in the blank, and the special thing about me is that my mom is blind. And without missing a beat, Dusty looked at him and said, oh man, so do you know sign language and stuff? You got it? Got it? And the kid just looked at Dusty and he's like, dude, my mom can't see, you know? Like, no, I don't know sign. What are you talking about? But this event, this experience, it showed me something that I've found to be true again and again and again as people who want to follow Jesus, as people who want to be people of compassion. When we are introduced into someone's pain, sometimes we don't know how to respond. And it can make us a little uncomfortable. And it can cause us to say some things and do some things that really don't make a whole lot of sense. I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen this proven to be true in my ministry. Whenever somebody will come to me and they'll share with me the hardships of their own life. And all that I want to do is to say something that will be beneficial to them, to say something that will help them, to say something that's profound. I want to provide some sort of encouragement or some kind of a different viewpoint that maybe they didn't have in that exact moment. But so often whenever I found myself in these situations, it's like I open my mouth and sounds come out, but words or anything helpful, not so much. That's been my experience time and time again. So today, we're beginning the third and final section of our series, Encounters. Over the first two sections, we looked at various encounters that Jesus had throughout his life and ministry with groups of people. And then over the last 4 weeks, we saw different encounters that Jesus had throughout his life and ministry with individual women. And now, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at different individual encounters that Jesus had with different men. And this morning, we're going to look at a story where a man's pain had become the topic of discussion. And encountering this man's pain, it just caused people to act really, really strange. Now, I'm not interested today in comparing one person's pain to another person's pain, but with that said, it's hard for me to imagine the challenge of having to navigate this world without being able to see. I remember whenever my grandma Turner, she was diagnosed with this degenerative eye disease, and she was told she was going to lose sight in one of her eyes, and she ended up just losing the eye completely. But I remember shortly after her diagnosis, sitting down with her and looking her in the face and asking her how she was, and her just telling me how sad she was, and being able to see on her face how scared she was as she struggled to accept the lack of freedom that she knew lied ahead of her once her sight was gone. And for many of us who have our eyesight, it's really difficult to even imagine how difficult it would be to not be able to see. And it seems that was likely true in Jesus' day too. So if you have your Bible, go ahead and open up to John chapter 9. John chapter 9. is where we'll be today. And this is a chapter that is all about blindness. You have physical blindness, you have relational blindness, you have situational blindness, but then there's also all kinds of spiritual blindness too. John chapter 9, beginning in verse 1, this is what we read. As Jesus went along, he saw a blind man from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" So, the end of John chapter 8, we see that Jesus, he's just leaving the temple courts after another intense encounter with the religious leaders. And on the way, he and his disciples, they encounter this man who was born blind. So it's likely that they're still in the same vicinity as the temple. It wasn't uncommon in this day whenever you had somebody who had a handicap or some kind of ailment that would have kept them from being able to work, that they would make their way to the temple on a daily basis, and they would sit at the temple gates to where they would beg, and they would ask for what were called alms. They would just ask these people who were on their way to or from worship to show some sort of compassion to them out of their devotion to God. And so it's likely that some of the disciples who were from this area, that they probably would have seen this man many different times and in many different points of their lives. And perhaps over time, this man has become nothing more than a part of the scenery, because they certainly seem to lack any sort of compassion to this man with their very, very pointed question. Jesus, who sinned? Was it this guy? This guy who's sitting right here, like, is this the bad guy who's right here? Is this the sinner? Or is it his mom or his dad? There was a common teaching from the rabbis in this day, and I believe that this teaching still permeates our society today, but it led to this deeply held belief that bad things happen to people as a punishment for their sin. And on a certain level, you hear that, and it's like, well yes, that's true. Every bad thing that we experience in this world is the result of sin. Like Genesis chapter 3, sin. Living in this broken world where our relationship with God was broken. Because of sin, we live in a world that has sickness and pain and death. But this viewpoint that the disciples had, it was so dangerous, because we are promised in life, Jesus promises in this life, you will have trouble. You will have trouble. You will face pain. You will face circumstances that don't make sense. You will face things that change your life forever. You will face things that cause you to cry until you run out of tears. And yes, those things are a result of sin, but they are not necessarily a sign that God is punishing you for your sin. Instead, it's a sign that this world is broken, and pain accompanies brokenness. But the disciples, they're asking Jesus, whose sin is causing this man to be punished, while not giving a single thought to the pain that this man was living with day in and day out. Aaron Chambers, he wrote a book called Running on Empty, and he says this: one who knows about God can recite a dozen scriptures about helping hurting people, but one who knows God simply helps dozens of hurting people. Here, the disciples, they're just trying to act spiritual with their deep theological questions, but they're really missing it. So Jesus answers their misguided question by saying, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in him. This verse is so powerful, but this verse is also so uncomfortable. Whenever you read this, you see that word "that" in there. And the word "that" is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this context. It says, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And it's important that we walk away with a proper interpretation of the word "that" in this context. A proper translation would be translated as, the word "that" would be translated as "with the result that." It would not be translated as "in order that." So this is referring to a result, not a purpose. Jesus is not announcing why this man was born blind. He's just announcing what the result of his blindness will be. But the answer to the disciples' original question of who sinned, was it this man or was it his parents? Jesus is saying, no, it was neither. It's not this man's sin, it's not his parents' sin that blinded him. However, because of his circumstances, the power of God can and will be revealed through him. And I know that so many of us, whenever we hear this, we believe this to be true. We believe that in our pain, that the power of God is displayed through us, that the glory of God is displayed through our trials. And there are others of us in this room that whenever we hear this, we want this to be true. We desperately want to believe that in our trials that God is working, but man, that is such a hard thing to do. It's so easy in our trials whenever some kind of unforeseen circumstances arise in our life. It's so easy for us to immediately just start asking the question, why? Why is this happening to me? And after we ask the question why, it's equally as easy to start trying to fix whatever the trial is on our own. But is it possible that this drive to try and short circuit our trials could lead us to missing the glory of God through them all? And listen, church, I understand that nothing about this is natural. Nothing about this is comfortable, but it all comes from a place of surrender. It requires a life and a posture that says, I know, Jesus, I know that I am not my own, and I am here for your glory, no matter what. And after saying this, Jesus did one of those things where it just feels like he's trying to see, do you really trust me? So he spits in the dirt, and he picks up the dirt and his saliva, and he begins to mix it and knead it all together. And then he goes and he places it on the man's eyes, and he says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And so the man went, and he washed, and he came home seeing. I love verses like this all through Scripture so much. Honestly, they're some of my favorite verses. So they heard the word of the Lord, and they did what the Lord had commanded them to do. So he went. There is literally nothing about what Jesus is asking this man to do that makes any kind of logical sense at all. But still, the man, he went. He knew that there was nothing he could do to make himself see. And the only thing that he could do was to trust what Jesus said. And so he went, and he came home seeing. It was like he was living with this mindset of what do I have to lose? And I'm telling you, man, whenever it comes to our relationship with Jesus, sometimes this what do I have to lose whenever it comes to being obedient to Jesus, that can be the mindset that allows the power of God to be put on full display in our lives. And so for the very first time, this man, he sees shapes and colors. He sees trees and flowers, the skies and the people. He's heard people describe the beauty of creation and the beauty of the world, but now he sees it and he's able to understand. I just have to ask you, can you imagine this man's excitement in this moment right now? For the very first time, he can see, but instead of finding people who want to celebrate with him, all that he keeps running into are people who want to question him and people who want to interrogate him. First, it was his neighbors who were just trying to make sense of everything that's happened. They're like, are you the guy? Are you the one who's been blind? Are you the one who goes to the temple and who's constantly begging? Like, is that who you are? And he assures them, yes, that's me. And then they ask a really, really good question. They say, okay, but how? Like, how did this happen? And then one thing that you can know throughout Jesus' life and ministry, especially at this point, is that anytime any kind of controversy was around, you could be sure that the religious leaders and the Pharisees weren't going to be too far behind. And one thing that always seemed to bother the Pharisees was whenever Jesus performed any kind of miracle on the Sabbath day. And this miracle, here in John chapter 9, it happened on the Sabbath. But we have to remember that the Pharisees had turned the Sabbath into something that God never intended it to be. So you have this man who can see for the very first time, and instead of the religious leaders, like the people that he goes to hear talk to him about a good and a loving God, instead of the religious leaders celebrating with him, they just want to interrogate him, attempting to get him to say that there's no way that the one who healed him could be from God, because no one from God would break the Sabbath in this way. But the formerly blind man, he does not bite. Instead, he just looks at them and very matter-of-factly says, well, the man who healed me, he is a prophet. And the Pharisees, they can see that they're not getting anywhere with this guy, so they decide to move on in their plan. They go to plan B, and they go to this man's parents, and they begin to ask this man's parents some questions. They ask, is this your son? Is this the one that you say was born blind? How is it that he can now see? In verse 20, we know that he is our son, the parents answer, and we know that he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself. And his parents, they said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. And that's why his parents said, he is of age. Ask him. And it's like, in other words, we've seen what you do to people who acknowledge Jesus, and we don't want any part of that. Plus, he's a big boy. So go talk to him. And with each and every passing conversation, the Pharisees, they're becoming more and more irritated because they're not getting anywhere. They can't accept that Jesus has the power and the authority to do these kinds of things, because if Jesus has the power and the authority to do these kinds of things, then that means that he did come from God, and that means that the rebukes that he's made towards them just might be true. And so they have no choice. They head back to the formerly blind man, and this time they try a little bit of a different tactic. They go into a little bit of spiritual manipulation to see if they can get this man to say what they want to hear. Verse 24, a second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know this man, meaning Jesus, we know this man is a sinner. And the formerly blind man replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. But one thing I do know is I was blind, but now I see. I don't know why. I don't know how. I don't know what I don't know, but what I do know is that I was blind, but now I see. I come back to this. Can you imagine the whirlwind of a day that this guy's gone through? For the first time in his life, he can see. He's heard these voices all of his life, but for the first time, he's placing a face with the voice. He's made his way through life in total darkness, but now for the very first time, he can see the light. He can see how blue the sky can be. He can see a smile, and he's seeing plenty of scowls. He can see the faces of all the people who are going by. And again, don't you know that everything inside of him just wants to celebrate? But as he looks around, he can't find anybody who's willing to celebrate with him. Nobody has congratulated him. No one has asked him if it's everything that he dreamed it would be. Instead, everyone just wants to find out how this happened and where they can find the one who would do something like this on the Sabbath. And in response, all he says is, I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is I was blind, but now I see. Doesn't this sound a lot like maybe your story? I know it sounds a lot like my story, because we all know all about the darkness that lives deep within each and every one of us. We're all very well acquainted with our own prejudices, whether we ever want to acknowledge them or not. We're aware with our own short tempers. We're aware of our words and how they can negatively impact other people. We're aware of our actions that can hurt other people. We know very well, we're very well acquainted with our lust and our greed and our shame. We know all about the idols that we have in our lives, the people and the places that we put in a place that we look to for hope instead of looking to Jesus. And whenever we think back on our lifetime, we look back on a lifetime of regrets and disgusting behavior. And whenever we had disgusting behavior, we know that we had even more disgusting motives living in our hearts that didn't even make its way to our behavior. Yet in spite of all of this, Jesus came to give us new life. And when we stop and consider the depths of our sin and the reach of His grace, maybe our response should be like, I don't know. I don't know what I could have done to deserve this kind of favor. I don't know what I could have done to earn this kind of grace, but what I do know is that I was blind, but now I see. This story is full of blindness. Everywhere you look, there's blindness. You have the blindness of the disciples who looked at this man who had been created in the image of God as an opportunity to try and impress Jesus with their deep theological questions. You have the blindness of the Pharisees who viewed this man who was created in the image of God as a pawn in their pursuit of condemning Jesus. And then you have the blindness of the blind man. And the thing that should alarm each and every one of us is that what we see in this story is that the physical blindness of the blind man was the easiest blindness to be healed. And I don't think that's changed to this day. I mean, come on, can you imagine if this formerly blind man decided, even though he now had sight, even though he had a new kind of freedom, even though he had been healed, can you imagine if he would have decided that he was going to continue to live as though he were blind? If he went home and he grabbed his robe and he cut a piece of cloth off his robe and he tied it around his eyes and he walked around as though he couldn't see. If he took the freedom that Jesus had given him and just was like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. No, you can't imagine that, right? I mean, that'd be ridiculous. But I think that's the story of so many of us who claim to follow Jesus today. We've been offered a light that will expose the darkness that lives within us. We've been offered the Holy Spirit of Jesus Christ, the living Christ. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead to reside within us, to guide us, to lead us, and to convict us. We've been offered a new life in Jesus, where our old life of darkness is gone, and our new life in the light of Christ has begun. Church, I just have to say, may we never grow tired of the amazing grace of Jesus Christ. May we never become bored of the amazing grace of Jesus Christ. And may we never become numb to the amazing grace of Jesus Christ. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.